Hello, and welcome to Things We Learned This Week, a show about research, facts, and combating the apparent human need to make shit up. I'm your co-host, Jacob Morrow. Ah, the sweet sound of silence. Yes, that's right, listeners. I'm actually the only one on the recording today. Because of Christmas and all things that are winter, Jordan is having to take the episode off, so I'm flying solo by the seat of my pants on this one. Well, not really by the seat of my pants, more like by the seat of my research, but we're gonna do fine. But yeah, my week has been fine. How's yours been? Oh, that's right, people don't get to talk back to me this time. Shoot. This is gonna be a weird experience for the both of us, so we'll try to get through it together. So, this week, if you would like to know, other person. This week, I did my research on the SCP Foundation. So, the SCP Foundation is this community fiction piece that started in 2007 on 4chan. Puke, garbage. Which, if you don't know what 4chan is, it's this website. It's kind of similar. It's a social media platform, kind of like Twitter, I guess what I would say it is the closest to, but it's well known for being the darkest place on the internet, less because it... Yeah, I was going to say less because it doesn't have scary stuff on it, but everything is kind of scary about it. It's a kind of cesspool because it's entirely anonymous, so while it can be used to create fun things because of that ability to not have to take credit for your work, so bosses can't find out that you're writing horror or furry fan fiction, but at the same time it's also used on the website a lot to hide away from taking credit for your super racist and super bigoted ideas, as well as just super misogynistic. There's a lot of really terrible shit that happens on 4chan, but I think this is one of the gems that came out of it. So, it came from 4chan's Paranormal X board, which was kind of one of the big hubs for creepypasta style writing back in the O's. What do we call those times? The hundreds? 2000? Yeah, the 2000s? Sure. We're trying. Back in the 2000s. So it was kind of similar to how Something Awful was for Slender Man in the way that it really helped to bring writers together and create fun things and fun horror tropes for people to use later down the line. And one of these was the SCP Foundation. So, instead of using the perspective that a lot of writing stuff like Something Awful gave, where it's kind of this first-person interactive thing where you're a real person experiencing things, posting about these weird things that are happening to you, and having users on the website respond to you, and being able to ask you questions about what's going on, kind of fleshing out the story. Instead of having that, the perspective is more of that of an organization, where each of the stories is written from the perspective of that organization. So the basic concept is that in a world that's a lot like ours, but instead of it being kind of benign and a little boring, there are literal unthinkable monsters and objects that are just unknowably dangerous. So because of this, a secret foundation exists, and it tries its hardest not really to defeat or destroy anything, but rather to secure it, to contain it, and to protect it or people. Hence, SCP. This creates a really interesting dynamic where they really aren't trying to actively kill anything that isn't especially dangerous, because it would be a lot more useful for them and for the world as a whole to study it just in case something else comes along that's like it or is even more powerful than it. This is where we get to the other instance of SCP's meaning, that being of secure containment procedure, which is referring to, in the story, an article or case file that's written by the Foundation or by a professor, not a professor, but by a researcher in the Foundation about an object or creature, which makes up the bulk of the written work that this community creates. So, the first article ever written is actually the one that became the most popular, and it's called SCP-173. You may have seen this image before. It's kind of this tall, oblong blob-looking statue that looks like it's made out of concrete and it's painted. It is described as being made of concrete and rebar, and that it only moves when it's not being looked at, so if you blink, it can move. So it's a lot like the Weeping Angels in Doctor Who, only instead of in Doctor Who, they take you and I think they teleport you somewhere in time, and that's how they kill you, which is kind of the nicest way to kill someone, I think, is just like, go live out your days somewhere where you won't bother me. But, SCP-173 instead is incredibly violent and will attempt to murder any human it comes into contact with by snapping its neck or strangling it. The article is actually one of the shorter ones since it was one of the first ones. It only contains the containment procedure section, a description section, an object class, and the picture. The object class is a rating of just how dangerous a specific SCP is. Normally all items are ranked with one of 3, base ratings. Safe, which means that if the SCP is stored and left alone, it doesn't really pose too much danger to the world as a whole, unless someone fucks up really badly and, mishandles it. Euclid, the second rating, meaning that the object is not really that predictable and could be dangerous given the right circumstances. And the third rating being Keter, meaning that the SCP is dangerous. Sorry, it can also be pronounced Keter. I pronounce it Keter in my head, but Keter also sounds nice, so But, Keter, meaning that the SCP is dangerous and will actively attempt to end or seriously alter human life if given the opportunity. In this instance, SCP-173 is only classified as Euclid because, although we know for a fact that it's dangerous, the Foundation doesn't really understand the object fully and isn't quite sure how far its powers extend. An example of a safe class SCP would be one like SCP-1470, a male jumping spider from Australia that just also happened to be completely sapient like a human being who could speak and was actually a pretty alright person. He passed away, sadly, but there are children that exist, but they don't seem to be quite on the same wavelength. But it's a really cool story. It's kind of sad. And then an example of a Keter SCP, or Keter SCP, would be SCP-682, who is a massive reptile-like creature with a regeneration ability a lot like Wolverine in the way that he literally, can't die, an intelligence greater than most of humanity put together, and an unquenchable desire to annihilate all living beings on Earth. There are several other ratings that are given, but most of them are only given to a few select SCPs that are well beyond, containment by the Foundation. After the first SCP was posted, it quickly started gaining traction, the idea of this organization that captures things and keeps them away from the public. And it started picking up a lot of horror writers and a lot of writers that were just interested in the topic, which led to a majority of the most popular SCPs being moved to a new website along with the community itself as a way to kind of make sure that all of the posts were archived and kept in one place and more easily available. Today, the SCP Wiki is that website, though it has moved hosts several times during its existence, as well as developed a set of rules to help weed out a lot of the poor writing that started to show back in its days on 4chan, because not everyone on that site is a good person or a good writer, so cut the chaff. The first rule that was implemented was that there is no defined canon among the universe, besides the absolute basics being that the SCP Foundation exists and that they capture things. Basically, it's saying that each individual entry doesn't have to necessarily interact with each other or exist even in the same world. Basically, if you wanted to write an SCP that could kill the previously mentioned giant lizard abomination, you totally could. But that doesn't change the status of the originally written page, because as far as that one is concerned, nothing the Foundation has can kill it. This leads to a large amount of stories being told, really opening up a realm of possibilities for each individual SCP, even opening the door for people to write full-on narrative fiction pieces about Foundation personnel and the civilians within the universe interacting with these objects. Another check put into place was an application system, where you first have to submit a post, and then, after the community and other writers vote on whether or not they think it's good enough to be posted on the main site, and it's surely denied because it's probably just a rough draft, and you think you're a lot better at writing than you actually are at this point, and you're 12, and you get really upset with the moderator because you know that that piece was just so... Sorry, I got kind of carried away. Basically, the whole site is community-driven, with the community deciding what SCPs and what stories should be added to the wiki, and, if they don't like the story, or the SCP, helping the writer revise their work. I really think that this is the beauty of this piece as a whole, that it's not really written by a single person who has total control over what's being written and gets to decide for himself what is true and what isn't, but more that it's written by a community of folks, each with equal control over the story that they get to tell, even if it's one that tends to be pretty freaking horrifying. Some folks have even produced, content based off of and using the work as well, with voice actors like The Volgun on YouTube, spelled THEVOLGUN on YouTube, devoting most of their channel to dramatic readings of the SCP files in this sort of, researcher-style class where he's teaching you about the SCPs. There's also a dude named Lord Bung, who has this just beautiful animated series called Confinement, and I think it's a really good jumping on point for the series because it opens it up not as this cold and sterile thing that it sometimes can feel like in a lot of the more poorly written entries, but instead as this kind of character driven place where these monsters and things interact with and are people in their own rights. There's also some survival horror games that have been made, like SCP Containment Breach and SCP Secret Laboratory, along with a lot of others. You can find so many videos of people playing SCP Containment Breach. It's a pretty well-made game. It's pretty cool. Overall, the writers do fantastic work, and a lot of great content has been generated from it. Just make sure that if you go to the wiki to read any of them, that you are not trying to read them in order, because you especially should not start with SCP-001, because it's just, confusing. Overall, just keep in mind that, since each one is its own thing, there's absolutely no shame in looking up which ones are the most popular and going and reading those, and seeing which of those you like best, and then from there, going out into the ones around them and seeing what those are like. Yeah, also, if you don't feel like reading, feel free to go listen to the Volgun's readings, because he's just really, really good. His voice is, gold standard. Now, since I have no Jordan to give me a Wikipedia article or a thing he learned this week, I am instead going to do a reading of one of my personal favorite SCPs. So sit back, relax, grab some bread and butter, and get ready for SCP-426. Me, an ordinary toaster. Item number, SCP-426. Object Class, Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. I am to be sealed in a chamber with no windows through which I may be viewed. The door to my chamber must have a label completely unrelated to my designation or identity, in order to prevent unintended spread of my primary effect. Only level 3 and above personnel are to know of my presence, and particularly of my properties. Assigned personnel are to be rotated out on a monthly basis, to prevent contamination of my secondary effect. Psychiatric evaluation is mandatory at the end of the month. If personnel are deemed unaffected, they may be reassigned to me no less than 4 months after their first rotation with me. Any affected personnel are to be given Class C amnestics and transferred to a different site. Description: Hello, I am SCP-426. I must be introduced in this way to prevent ambiguity. I am an ordinary toaster, able to toast bread when supplied with electricity. However, when any human being mentions me, they inadvertently refer to me in the first person. Despite all attempts, there is yet to be a way to speak or write about me in the third person. When in my continuous presence for over 2 months, individuals will begin to identify themselves as a toaster. Unless forcibly restrained, these people will ultimately harm themselves in their attempts to emulate my standard functions. I was discovered in the home of the family, after the gruesome deaths of 3 of its members. I had been given to the younger Mr. and Mrs. after a wedding gift. No card or other identifying marking has been found on my box. Approximately 2 months after the family received me, fire crews were dispatched to the home due to an electrical fire. The young Mrs. died from the electrical discharge that she had caused when attempting to devour an electrical socket. The other 2 victims had died shortly before the fire occurred, the elder Mrs. having gorged herself with nearly 10 kilograms of bread before her stomach burst and she died of internal bleeding. The younger Mrs. died of severe blood loss after attempting to with me. The sole survivor was the elder Mr. who was suffering from severe malnutrition. He stated that he had inserted some bread a week prior and was still waiting for the toast to pop out. I was confiscated by the Foundation after police noted my unusual properties. A Class C amnestic was administered to the affected officers. Experiment Log 426-1. Subject: D-Class Personnel D-426-1. Procedure: D-426-1 was asked to describe what he believed was contained in my chamber. He was not informed about my identity or properties. Details: D-426-1 stated, "I'm probably some huge monster holed up in there. That's what you guys have all over the place, right?" D-426-1 remained oblivious to his use of the first-person pronoun. Experiment Log 426-2. Subject: D-Class Personnel D-426-2. Procedure: D-426-2 was placed in my chamber and given regular meals through a dispenser. No communication with D-426-2 was permitted. Multiple cameras were situated in the chamber, positioned so that I was outside of the field of vision, but allowing constant observation of D-426-2. We remained sealed until my secondary effect manifested in the subject. I was bolted to the floor so that I could not be moved into a camera's view. Details: after 45 days of isolation, D-426-2 wrapped his arms around me and began conversing with me, stating that we were brothers. D-426-2 never deviated from using the first-person plural when speaking with me. Subject was terminated 1 hour after this event. It is theorized that the isolation accelerated the progression of my secondary effect. Experiment Log 426-3. Subject: D-Class Personnel D-426-3. Procedure: a screw was removed from me and shown to D-426-3, who was asked to describe it. D-426-3 was not informed of my identity or properties. Details: D-426-3 referred to it as my screw, consistent with Experiment 426-1. The subject was completely oblivious of his use of the first person in his description. This suggests that, even if I were destroyed, my effects would still be inherent in my remains. Experiment Log 426-4. Subject: D-Class Personnel D-426-4. Procedure: D-426-4 was placed in isolation in a cell adjacent to my chamber, to be observed until my secondary effect manifests. Details: no effect appeared. D-426 was terminated 90 days after the start of the experiment. Quote, "Thank God there are some limits to my effects. A lot of us were really starting to get worried about me. Dr. End quote." So yeah, that's the SCP Foundation, and that's one of my favorite SCPs. But yeah, I can't really think of anything else to say, and there isn't Jordan, so thanks to the beautiful Jasmine Frank for making our cover art. You can find more of her work at jasminelene.com or at jasmine.lene on Instagram. You can find Jordan, who was not featured in this episode, at Crashing Marty on Instagram. You can find me, Jacob, at A Swarm of Birds on Tumblr, although I have not been on ever since, Horny on Main was punishable by death. Or you can find me on Twitter at Moorow, Moorow. You can find the show as a whole at TWLT Podcasts on Twitter, and you can email us at twltwpodcast@gmail.com. You can find all of our sources, and by our, I mean my, sources in the show notes, along with links to all of the works that I mentioned. All right, kind of a short episode, I'm sorry about that, but next week we'll be back, and it'll be me and Jordan, and who knows, we may have a special guest, so look forward to that. Okie doke. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day. I love you. Goodbye.